This afternoon was all about refining, just going through and making some sentence level corrections and just refining what I'm doing to the point where it's not even sentence level corrections. It's simply word choice. I'm going through and replacing single words here and there. I'm going through just making some some changes on that end. Very very small things, seemingly minute changes. But again, at this point, this is what it comes down to. As I was going through it, though, one of the small areas that I was fixing a lot was my use of generic descriptions. I use an editing software, and it's what you're seeing on the computer right now, that can basically run reports and tell me, all right, hey, if you use kind of an excessive number of this, take a few of these out. Use too many filler words, too many, it'll tell you basically too many general descriptions, etc. And so it can do basically like too many adjectives. It can go through and basically tell you too many adverbs. It can go through and kind of analyze the frequency of certain terms and how much you're using and all that stuff, and sort of make recommendations on what to scale back on. And so today, for me, a lot of it was just generic descriptions that I was doing. I just had, the computer was saying, yeah, you got a few too many, scale back a little bit. So I was going through making some corrections here, and just that's what you're seeing. But it's interesting that I think about that, in that as I was going through this, the use of generic descriptions and the use of really just generic writing, right? Very bland writing, I've mentioned before, it comes from a lack of knowledge. It comes from a lack of specificity. The more generic something is, obviously by extension, that means it's not specific. And specific writing is the crux of really good writing. The more specific you can get, the better. Many people that come from a background in poetry will, it's awesome to have that skill. It's fantastic to weave it in. But poetic language tends to get away with things that are not specific. It tends to be less concrete. You can make more hyperbolic statements. You can use a lot more exaggeration in your terminology. You don't necessarily need to be as accurate, right? You're less inclined to have a reader of poetry say, I don't believe that's true of your character. I don't believe your character. I don't believe what you wrote is actually true, than you are with someone who's the reader of just fiction prose, right, of a novel. Much more likely to have someone say, yeah, I don't believe you. I don't believe what you wrote. I don't think what you wrote is true. And I've mentioned this in other videos before, that, right, the idea of exaggeration and all that. But the key to getting specific, as I mentioned, though, the key to avoiding wide generalities is knowing your subject, and that comes from experience and that comes from research. More broadly, and this is me speaking on a very broad context. If what you're writing about lacks specificity, if it's a lot of generalities, and it's not so much even the subject matter, right? It's not so much that you don't know your subject matter. It's just that your writing in general tends to include a lot of generalities, and the scenes you write tend to be general, and you can't really come up with specific things that can make the world feel very vibrant. What you tend to lack then is general experience. You lack experience. And more broadly, you lack experience with the world. If you can't write a social gathering well, right? If you don't know what to include in a social gathering, if you have to sort of like imagine how conversations with people in the real world go, if you have to sort of imagine how a coffee shop conversation goes, you have to imagine how people interact in the day-to-day in these scenarios, and they're very general common experiences, you lack basically the very general experience of life. And it's not uncommon. Writers are by extension very, very much introverted, and they tend to, especially when they're younger, tend to lack this. This is in part, in addition to just improving skill, but this is in part why writers usually write their magnum opuses, their best works, as they get older. That's why the older you get, the better your writing tends to be in a way, because you have more experience, you've lived more, you know more experiences, you know more social dynamics, you've experienced more issues with relationships, right? You've dealt with more fighting and arguments amongst friends, family, lovers, etc. You've experienced more of getting the job, losing the job, being down in your luck, hitting the highest of highs, reaching the lowest of lows, all that. You've experienced these events the more that you live, and it's when you write it, you can write something that's very concrete. The person that doesn't have this experience, the younger person, specifically, right, the less experienced individual. And when I say young, I don't necessarily even mean like physically young. I just mean inexperienced. So the inexperienced person tends to write in generalities because they don't know this. They don't, they may not know. They might be writing about, I don't know, someone having, someone having an affair and trying to like confess to or trying to hide it, whatever, basically. And they may have never known anyone who's gone through that, right? So they have to kind of imagine, all right, I've seen in movies this is how it happens. I've seen how this happens, but it's harder because you haven't experienced it yourself, right? They probably have, and you have to go research it to find someone who's done that and kind of get their perspective on it. You have to listen, read biographies or whatever and kind of figure that out. Just as an example, right? You have to experience more of life to include more of life in your work. Otherwise, it feels hollow and you miss things. And the reader will pick it up. It's a lot easier than you think for a reader to read your work and go, this person has never experienced this in their entire life. This person's never been in this scenario in their entire life, and they have no idea what they're talking about. Or they're writing so vaguely because they're trying to avoid having to go into the details that they don't know of, right? It's very easy to be general and avoid that. And so what I would encourage you to do in general is be more open to experiences of the world, be more open to interacting more with the world. If for no other reason than it improves your writing. The more experiences you have, the more you can see these events in your mind, the more you can include it in your work and the more realistic it's going to come across. This this video tends to be one of those ones where it's like where I tie in like something small and I sort of make it broad and all that stuff. But I hope that's understandable. I hope that you kind of get really the nature of why that needs to happen. This is not me just saying, go out and experience the world and stuff. I'm saying for your writing, even on a selfish level, you need to know more of the world. Yeah. And so with that, I do wish you the best with writing. I do wish you a happy day of writing. I'm going to be back tomorrow. We're starting to get into the thick of it here. We're starting to get into the hard parts of the job, the challenging parts of the work. For, I guess, good or bad, that's what's coming now. And so it's a lot of good, but obviously getting towards the end, you start second guessing yourself. And there's a lot of the psychological demons tend to come up in this part of the process where you second guess yourself. You tell yourself, that you wasted a whole year of your life on this project here. It's not going to come through. All that, those voices start to come. And I'm starting to experience that now that I get towards the end. These things always happen at the very end. Always happens. That's why when you read the Odyssey and you hear the tale of Odysseus there, when he gets the bag of wind, his crew gets a bag of wind, and at the beginning of the story, he almost reaches like the shores, like the shores of home. You can actually, from the ship, I think you can actually see the docks, like from his ship. He's just about to get home, and someone opens up the bag of wind there, and the wind shoots him like thousands of miles across the sea back, and he has to spend the whole rest of the book getting back home again, right? It's a metaphor that wind is a metaphor basically for your goals, that your sort of inner demons, that inner psychology there, it comes at the very end. It comes at the absolute end of this process. Always when you get to the finish line, that's when the psychological demons come the worst. It's very paradoxical. You wouldn't think so. You think that's when it silences the most. No, that is when they reach out for that last grasp. It's like the horror villain at the end of those movies there where you think you kill the bad guy, they think the villain's been killed, right? The monster's been beaten, and all of a sudden, like, it just grabs the character from behind. The moment they let their guard down, you got to fight him one last time. That's what this is. That's where I'm at now. So, getting to that, but I'll be back tomorrow, and yeah, we're closing on the ending here.